Hello and welcome to Smart Money Simplified with Brent Mekosh. Brent, good to see you, my man. How are you?
I'm doing great. I actually took yesterday off, played a little bit of hooky, and took my son out of school, and we went skiing and had a
Oh,
great
man.
time.
Okay,
A
wait
lot
a
of people
second.
that
You're in
aren't in
Arizona. How's that work?
just what I was about to say is a lot of people that are not in Arizona say, wait a second, it's all golf and cactus and everything. But about 2 hours from here, Arizona Snowball is sitting on about an 80-inch base right now. We had a fantastic
Really?
time. It's good.
Wow, I had no idea. And I actually lived down there for a little while, so that's surprising to me.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, you have a guest on your show today. Who'd you bring on?
Brought on Jay Shah, and he's a cardiologist. He's been in a number of different places, formerly with Mayo Clinic. Now he's chief medical officer for a company called Aktiia. And I'm going to start with a personal story that I think is probably a good intro to our conversation. So I always have been a guy that's had a white coat syndrome. So if I go in specifically around blood pressure, they put this cuff on me, you get some pretty scary readings sometimes. And this has been
Hmm.
regardless of what kind of shape or condition that I've in. And probably about 3 years ago, I went to Mayo Clinic. They put the cuff on, it's high. They want to talk to me about medication. And I'm not against taking medication, but if I can avoid doing it, I want to. And I said, yeah, let's, what's my plan B? And they said, we're going to put a monitor on you for 24 hours and let's see what your blood pressure is doing real time. So I say, okay. So I've got a big cuff thing that's strung to my shoulder. And I'm wearing something that looks essentially like the size of a small purse. And I got to wear this thing for 24 hours. It's inflating, deflating. The good news is as it turned out, yeah, I do have white coat syndrome. And most of the day, and particularly through the evening, my blood pressure was totally normal. It just wasn't when I got around a physician. And that's one of the reasons that when this product now that we're going to talk about today is released in the US, I'm definitely getting one of these things because we're talking about a small wearable device that can real time throughout the day and almost in a fashion that you're not going to notice, be able to take your blood pressure and let you know what's going on
Hmm.
with a really pivotal piece of health data real time. So I'm excited for this conversation today, both because Jay's a friend of mine and I'm excited about what he's doing with this company, but also about having a product like this and the likelihood that many more products like this in the future are going to come in the American market, I think is a really great thing. So, Jay, thank you for joining me today. And why don't we start by just tell me a bit of your background? I mean, I met you when you were at Mayo, but you've got a lot of background in healthcare before that.
Sure. Thank you very much, Brent, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here and good to see you guys. So, yeah, I have, I'm a cardiologist by training and I've been in practice for over 10 years. I started my journey at the University of Missouri in medical school and then went to do my internal medicine training at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. And then did my cardiology fellowship at Washington University in St. Louis. And then after all that training, I did something quite a bit different, I guess, for an academically trained cardiologist. I went and started my own practice from scratch in Portland, Oregon. So started with two EKG machines and an MA in an office, and that was it. And sort of had to build it from scratch, and which was incredibly enjoyable, rewarding, and an education in and of itself. And I did that for 7 years and built it into a very large, busy practice with multiple sites and multiple hospitals. And after about 7 years of doing that, as well as running the overall larger multi-specialty group of 600 employees and 110 docs, I got this opportunity at Mayo Clinic for me and my partner, and we came down to Mayo Clinic in Arizona. And I started their thoracic aortic aneurysm program, which they hadn't had here in Arizona. So for people who have aneurysms or enlargement of their main aorta in their chest, we started a center that grew into sort of a nationally known and referral center for people across the country and somewhat across the world. And so that's what I've done in terms of clinical and operational aspects in medicine for now over 10 years. And about a year and a half ago, I kind of got the urge to try something different, to see if there's an avenue for me to have a broader impact on the world using my expertise and knowledge in medicine and medical practice and day-to-day practice, but in a different way, to have a much wider and deeper impact. And so I started looking around, and eventually, after about a year of searching and a lot of soul searching and informational interviews, stumbled upon this company called Aktiia, which is a Swiss startup, and we'll talk much more about it. And I didn't know them, and just happened to reach out on LinkedIn, and they were looking for someone like me, and I happened to have the skill set, and it just was, I guess, meant to be. It was the right person at the right time in the right place. And so I came on as the chief medical officer a little over a year ago, And then a few months ago, I've left Mayo Clinic now to go full time with Aktiia. And it's been an incredible journey and a really enjoyable one. I've loved and don't regret at all the decision so far, at least, to leave clinical practice. And I've really enjoyed it, and I've learned and am learning every day so much. And so I think I've really just sort of found that avenue for delivering sort of my knowledge to a much wider and broader impact in a way that I can feel passionate about every day.
I think what's really cool is that, you know, your road through medicine has been kind of different, because you basically, like you said, you opened your own shop. So you had an idea what it was like to be a small businessman. Then you go to a monster like Mayo Clinic, you know, massive, massive organization, multiple sites. And now you're heading into a startup world. I guess I don't want to take us too off base here, but what are the biggest lessons you think you got from each of those channels?
Well, I think that's true, that it is a different pathway than I think most physicians are kind of used to, and the traditional pathways in medicine. And I think one thing that I have just sort of learned over at each transition, there's been some, you know, significant growth opportunity that wasn't clearly perceived. I didn't clearly perceive it even before I took that opportunity. So, for example, you know, when I went from fellowship at in cardiology at Washington University, which is a 1,100 bed hospital with, you know, millions of patient visits per year across their whole enterprise, to literally 3 exam rooms and one person with 2 EKG machines, and, as you said, sort of a small business owner. I mean, I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I knew that it was something different, and I knew that it was exciting, and I knew I would learn something, or a lot of things, from it. And as it turned out, it was incredibly rewarding in so many different ways that I would have never thought about before, or I never could have expected before. And in a way, it was a risk, or at least all my mentors and people who I was used to, and my sort of peers, perceived it as a risk. In fact, that's sort of the feedback I got. They were like, "What are you doing? That sounds very strange. Why would you do that?" And I think that has played out again in several ways. Again, leaving from Mayo Clinic to go to a startup company. Again, similar ideas, similar sort of themes, is that questioning, like, why are you leaving? Why would you leave Mayo Clinic, and all the benefits that it has to working at Mayo Clinic. But I think in every case, at least for me personally, there's been such a incremental, or I would say actually not incremental, but an exponential amount of growth that has happened with each one of those transitions, that I know, at least for me personally, those are the right kind of choices for me. Those are the right, leaps to take. And as risky as they might seem, I think the reward on the other side is, multiples of that risk. And I'm very fortunate and lucky to have a very supportive partner, obviously, that's been trusting enough for me to do these things. But I think that's really the main thing that I've gotten out of it. The main message is that, for me personally, just to never stop learning, to never stop growing, and to try those, to take those risks or seeming risks, and just bet on yourself more than anything else.
Absolutely. I think that anytime you can get outside of that box, because, in almost all areas of life, years can go by, and also you look around and you realize that there's a whole entire world out there that you have no idea what's happening, because you're just in your thing. So I really, it's an incredible story to be able to again make those big decisions and continue to move forward. So
one thing I can add to that, Brent, is
please.
that in the culture of medicine, there is a inertia to moving outside of traditional boxes, right? We go through 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 3 to 8 years of subspecialty training. And you become this expert, which means you're extremely good at something fairly narrow. And so there is a lot of inertia once you've gone through that process, in this sort of almost lifetime or half of lifetime of career of training, of sort of a sense of, what did I do that for? Or aren't you giving that up in some way? But the truth is actually the opposite. And so while there's a lot of fear around that, and there's a lot of inertia in the medical community, what I've started telling my counterparts who ask me how this transition has been and what have I thought about along this pathway is more and more physicians contemplate leaving medicine and sort of trying to understand what's on the other side. I think that, that those sort of growth opportunities that are just not there in the daily practice of medicine, far outweigh those fears and those risks. And really, it isn't a concept of you're leaving all your training behind and it was all for nothing. Actually, you're building on it. You're taking all that training and then you're looking at it and using it in a much different way, in a highly valuable way. And truthfully, in industry, there are actually very few, people who do daily practice, who have lived day in and day out what it means to be on call on weekends, nighttime, to sort of go through the ups and downs of clinical practice and the real difficulties. And it's a really valuable perspective that I think is missing a lot of times from the sort of leaders in health tech, med tech, healthcare in general. So it's an important thing to remember as a physician, is that I think we need to be more a part of that leadership conversation.
Well, yeah. And I think in terms of what we're going to see happening, and I look at the utilization of technology that's coming in all areas, for sure in medicine, for sure in my business. And we haven't even seen it yet. I mean, in terms of what's coming in the next, this years, if not sooner than that. And to have people that have the clinical experience, like you have, actually dealing with patients, having done those, like you said, being on call, all the hours and the time and the energy you put in, also being part of now bringing some of these products to the marketplace, I think is hugely valuable to pretty much everybody. So why cardiology? Why did you get into cardiology to begin with?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have like an amazing answer to it, but truthfully, I always enjoyed cardiology in medical school, just because largely there are clear reasons for why things happen. Like it's pretty well figured out, unlike some other specialties where there's still a lot of uncertainty about why certain underlying disorders occur. Cardiology has fairly well spelled out underlying physiology and pathology, which means that the treatments that are directed towards those underlying events, whether they're a blockage in an artery or congestive heart failure or an arrhythmia, actually do help. So there's both a sense of an understanding of the disease that you're working with, as well as an understanding of how to treat it. And there are lots of good treatments. So that was one part. The other part was I really enjoyed knowing people. I enjoyed getting to know patients. So I really looked for some specialty that allowed me to see a patient and then follow them over a long period of time. So, other specialties where you see person one time, do a surgery, or see them in the ER, those didn't really appeal to me because I never really got to know the people. I really enjoyed getting to know people. And especially in my practice in Oregon, that was, time and time again proven to me. So I got to know their families. I was their sort of community doctor. They came to me, the first questions to me were always about me and my family, not about their, medical issues. And it really was a very rewarding sort of experience. And I think those are the two main things that drew me to cardiology, because you can do a lot of those, you can do a lot of great things, treatment of medicine, but within the concept of, being somebody's sort of long-term partner in their health.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Heart disease, #1 killer in the United States, correct?
In the world.
In the world. Okay. Why? That's a big question, but
that's a big question. But I think there's several main reasons. So first of all, communicable diseases used to be the biggest killer in the world, meaning like things like malaria, infectious disease, all across the world. In the developed countries, it started to become more the diseases of the rich, so to speak, of excess. And so as we went through the Industrial Revolution, and as an entire population started to move less, to drive more, to eat more, to have extremely calorie-rich, calorie-dense foods, and so obesity, really started to becoming extreme prevalence in certainly the United States as well as across the Western world. Then that brings along with it chronic non-communicable diseases. So high blood pressure, diabetes, all the things that come with obesity, and that then lead to the underlying, the end result, which is heart attacks, stroke, congestive heart failure, kidney disease. These are all diseases that generally result from excess sodium, excess food, excess calorie, excess, driving, not enough walking, not enough activity, not enough exercise. But the rest of the world is not immune to this. So the United States certainly is the most common, but in every continent except Africa right now, non-communicable diseases are the #1 cause of mortality and morbidity in the world, and cardiovascular diseases is the top of that list. And in Africa, they will surpass non-communicable diseases, will surpass communicable diseases as the #1 cause of death in 2030. So not very long, far from now, even in Africa. And so it's just the way the world has the sort of, I would say, collateral damage of progress, right? We have progress in a lot of different ways. Industrial revolution has come up with all these technologies, all these things that have made our life better and easier in a lot of ways. But the collateral of that is that it has taken away some of our ability to have healthier lifestyles and healthier habits. And in the end result is this overwhelming burden of cardiovascular disease and other, related disorders.
Now, specifically around blood pressure, why is that important? Why is it important to have that under control or lower?
Yeah. So blood pressure, well, people often talk about high blood pressure or hypertension as a risk factor. Even physicians are kind of guilty of that. But it's actually both a disease and a risk factor. And what's the difference? So a disease is actually some disorder of an underlying organ or organ system. And in high blood pressure or hypertension, there's an abnormal constriction or stiffening of the vessels throughout the body. And that is actually a disease of the vessels. It is a disease of the cardiovascular system. Something has changed in the underlying physiology that leads to this higher pressures or higher stiffness, which leads to higher pressure in the arteries. That's the disease. The risk factor is that the disease itself, the higher pressure in the arteries, doesn't cause any immediate problems. You can live for long periods of time with high blood pressure and not know it. You don't even feel it. The vast majority of us with high blood pressure don't feel it at all, have no symptoms. But what happens is that slowly over time, over years and decades, that higher pressure in the arteries, when it hits the organs, the brain, the eyes, the kidneys, the heart, it starts to do significant damage of the underlying organs that are not built for this higher pressure of blood coming into it. And so over time, it does its damage. That's real. And so that's why it's called the silent killer, because it's silent and it does its damage over long periods of time. And people generally don't even realize that they have a significant problem until decades after it has, started. And many times decades after it has really started to do its damage. And then some major event occurs, like a stroke happens where there's lack of blood flow to the brain for some reason, or kidneys start to fail, or the heart starts to fail, or there's a heart attack. That then triggers them to understand or start to understand that, look, there's been this problem all along that just wasn't well managed. And now it has led to this secondary problem. And so that's really why, hypertension, that's how it works and why it does its damage and, causes, it's the #1 cause, risk factor for death in the world. And it's the world's most common chronic condition.
I have a question for you. Have you heard of a guy named Wim Hof?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I just finished his book. And what he had said in this is he was talking about he's the Iceman. For people that don't know, he's run marathons up in the Arctic in a pair of shorts and no shoes and things like that. But as I read it, what kind of made sense to me, and tell me if he's wrong or if I'm wrong on this, is he mentioned that your cardiovascular system has 60,000 miles of arteries, blood vessels, capillaries, which is, it's an enormous system. And much like you were talking about, we've got these diseases, these disorders of affluence. And one of the things he said is, you know what, as human beings, it's probably 72 in my office right now. It's very comfortable. I get in my car, there's AC, there's heat at night, and here in the desert when it does get cold in the wintertime. And your body is never having to adapt to these extreme temperature changes. And so what his theory was anyway, is that by having these hot, cold plunges, everything else, you're constricting and opening up this other 60,000 miles of your cardiovascular system, which then is pulling some of the stress off your heart. Is it made sense to me, but what do you think? Is there anything to that?
I don't know if there's any specific research. I mean, there's a lot of, anecdotal, sort of talk about sort of that hot cold, when people do the ice plunges or the ice baths and then sort of going from hot to cold, about how there's some health benefits to it. I don't know if there's specific research around it. Mm-hmm. What I would say is that the ability of the blood vessels to react, meaning dilate and constrict, is part of the underlying problem of hypertension and overall cardiovascular disease.
Okay.
So if there is some evidence there that I'm either not aware of, or maybe hasn't been done or hasn't been proven, but if that does occur, we know that other sort of inputs into that distensibility or reactiveness of the vessels can be beneficial, primarily driven by this sort of compound called nitric oxide. So, more nitric oxide makes vessels more resilient to change, and they'll be able to flex and constrict a little bit better or significantly better. And so if there is any underlying truth to this theory, it probably has to do with that, that reactivity. And I think there are other ways to think about that in terms of long-term, when we see that from a pharmacologic standpoint with medications or other types of interventions, like just sort of routine significant exercise. That's what is changing with it's the constriction and relaxation in a much more significant way of the arteries, and the small arteries in particular.
Now let's talk about acquiring this data, because one of the things I think is really cool is I'm a numbers and a data guy. And at nighttime, I got a couple of sleep trackers that I wear. And what's really interesting is that I have an Oura ring. I wear a Garmin sometimes, depending on what kind of data I want. But you can really see how different decisions that you've made in the evening like radically impact the quality and the duration of your sleep. I mean, heart rate variance, and which I still don't understand, by the way. So since I have you here as a captive audience, you can tell me what that is. But if you have a cocktail at night or a couple,
yeah,
what that does, even if you slept the same amount of time, what that does to the quality of your sleep when you actually see it in the data is unbelievable. Yeah. So give me an idea. And what I am excited about your product you have coming out here is I do want to see what my blood pressure is doing throughout the day. Because when I wore that giant holster, which is ridiculously uncomfortable, the thing was inflating, deflating, doing all this stuff during the day. When I got the data a couple of days later, it was really cool to see it. You could see spikes at different points of the day, and I knew what I was doing. You could see at night, and how it reacted when I came home at night and you fell asleep and all this other stuff. So give me an idea in terms of what that does for both individuals and also the medical practitioners that are helping them to get a full picture of the data. Yeah. Describe to me particularly around blood pressure.
So I think the first thing to understand is that generally speaking, physicians, healthcare organizations who manage hypertension or manage blood pressure, which the vast majority of which is done by primary care physicians, by 85%, the rest was by specialists. The vast majority of hypertension management is done in an almost complete absence of data, almost completely. And here's an example. So, and this is a very common example. So even at Mayo Clinic, they're doing the clinic with thoracic aortic aneurysms. So they have a life-threatening condition, and the primary input of whether that aneurysm grows faster is their blood pressure, and looking at that data and making sure we understand it. And even there, it is exceedingly difficult to get people to monitor their blood pressure at home routinely. And that has to do just with the cumbersome nature of a home blood pressure cuff, having to sit in a defined position, put it in a certain way. You can't talk, you can't eat, you have to be quiet, you have to rest for 5 minutes. There's all kinds of restrictions around it. And so it's a very maybe false sort of just snapshot of a blood pressure at one point in time. You don't really know what happens the rest of the time. Even that ambulatory blood pressure monitor that you wore, which, by the way, is very infrequently used in most of the country. In fact, if you look at Medicare reported usage of ambulatory blood pressure monitors, of all the people who would qualify for use of ambulatory blood pressure monitors, the average rate of use was less than 0.5%.
Why is that? Why do you think?
It's because of partly the reason you talked about. It's extremely cumbersome. It's extremely bulky. And also there's a significant disincentive to use it. It doesn't reimburse hardly at all.
Okay.
So there's no incentive for physicians or organizations to take the time and energy to provide it, to maintain them, to look at the data. That essentially it's done for free or almost for free. So there's all kinds of things we can talk about why healthcare is a disincentive for these things, but that's the reality. And so even if you look at home blood pressure cuffs, which are on every street corner and every Walgreens and every drugstore in America that are not that expensive, the average use of a home blood pressure cuff is pitiful. In people who have hypertension, only 24% of people monitor their blood pressure more than once a week.
Wow.
51% of people never check their blood pressure and they have hypertension. So basically the point is that management of blood pressure is done in an almost complete absence of data. That's the first part. So then to get to your question is, well, how, wouldn't more data be more helpful? And of course, the answer is generally speaking, yes. And so basically what you do with this kind of device is basically, you'll be able to see your blood pressure patterns and trends over time. You'll be able to really understand, what it is from day to day, week to week, month to month, and you really get very granular details about your blood pressure. Conversely, though, there is a flip side to that, and that is that we don't want every single data point, right? I mean, our Aktiia system provides. Hey guys, can you hold on for a minute? There's a lot of noise coming from over there. Can we edit this out? I'm not going to stop anything. I'm just going to take a pause and just go tell these guys
no
to
problem.
be quiet. Okay,
Sure, no problem.
You got it.
He's got a couple kids at home.
Yeah, sounded like it. Not a problem.
I actually couldn't hear him.
You what?
I couldn't hear the kids in the background.
I could, but it wasn't that bad. And so again, people understand we're at home and so on and so forth. So
I think it actually it doesn't bug me because it makes the conversations, I think, more authentic in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as the kid's not,
Yeah. Depends on what they're saying in the background.
Sorry, Brent.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, not a biggie, man.
That happens. So, so kind of getting back to the question, though, Brent, if you just rephrase the question about the data, is that you were asking about the sort of, why is that data important, right?
Yeah.
And what you can get out of it. Okay. All right. So I'll just pick it up from here. So our system, at Aktiia, we have a very easy to wear bracelet. And what you get from it is about 20 to 30 blood pressure measurements a day, about 190 to 200 a week, and about 800 a month if you wear it continuously. And you say, well, how much of that data is actually important? And what aspects of that data are important? Is every minute important? Is every single measurement important? Or what's more important is the trends over time? Mm-hmm. And actually, it's pretty much the latter part that is important for physiology, for clinical decision-making, to understand if someone has hypertension. One data point at one time, like what you get with a blood pressure cuff, is almost meaningless. You really can't make any clear decisions or understanding of what is your blood pressure, because your blood pressure continuously fluctuates throughout the days, nights, weekends, and months. So what we do is we take all these measurements, but then we compile it into really actionable and sort of concise metrics. So when we display that data for people, we get a daily average. You'll see the trend, you'll see the individual measurements, but really what's more important is what is the average during the day? What is the average during the week? And you get those patterns, it's like you were talking about, that relate to sort of lifestyle, alcohol, sleep, all those other things. You'll be able to see patterns that emerge, that when let's say somebody does dry January and they stop drinking significant alcohol, is there a different pattern that is clear to see? We can demonstrate that very easily without wearing some big bulky device that, is very difficult to use. And you can see those trends, you can see those changes. Someone undergoes a significant exercise, starts a significant exercise program. And part of it is they want to see some positive reinforcement so that they can continue the behavior, right? So you can see those good behaviors show up in your blood pressure trends, or you start a diet, or you look at, you lose weight. All these things are sort of positive reinforcements, which for something like high blood pressure are so critical because there is no physical sign or symptom that you can see or feel. right? You can't see or feel or your blood pressure getting better or worse. And so we have to kind of create those feedback loops to people to reinforce the good behaviors and disincentivize the bad behaviors. And that's a lot of what that data allows us to do. It allows us to empower people to understand what their actions do to their underlying, physiology.
Now I'm going to ask you some loaded questions about the data itself, because I know that people are concerned that you've got all this very personal health data that's being harvested and staying somewhere. And if you look at my car insurance, for example, if I get a number of speeding tickets, accidents, it goes up. If I apply for a life insurance policy, I get the physical done, you're in great shape, you get a better rate. It's that simple. Health insurance seems to be like that's one of those issues that people are incredibly nervous that there can be almost ranges of coverage for that. Now, what you're doing is, if you look at the data from some of these various health trackers, just even in terms of a basic one, tracking steps, there's going to be health outcomes that are correlated with that. Tell me, and I know there's HIPAA and everything else, but what are some of the steps that are being taken, at least to try to protect some of that data? But also, if I was an insurance company, I'd want to also use it in a way that made sense for the company. It's a real tricky area.
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword. There are pros and cons on each side of it. So on the first part, which is security of the data and privacy. So there are strict requirements by all regulatory bodies and all healthcare organizations. First of all, you have to be HIPAA compliant. Then there's, even on top of that, there are layers of, even higher, more stringent levels of compliance in Europe. There's something called GDPR, which is one of the most stringent levels of data compliance. And how we've architected the system is that we store no personal health information at all on our end. The servers are, it's completely de-identified. You cannot know who's who based if someone's just looking at the server. The only place that personal health information is stored is in that person's own device.
Okay, so it does not go to a centralized place.
It does bounce the signals. The signals from the device do get bounced to our servers for analysis, but as soon as they leave that person's device, they're completely de-identified.
Got it.
And then it returns back, and then it's re-identified. And same thing for the interface on the healthcare side. They have identified data, but we don't store it. So there's layers of protection there that are by requirement, and we do a lot of work and continue to do a lot of work to stay ahead of that. So that's that part of the sort of answer. Then there's other answers, which is, as you said, wouldn't insurance companies be, would want to see that their users, that their covered lives are healthier. So, for example, in Europe, where we've been commercial now for 18 months, we have 2 large deployments of large health insurance companies that are starting to use our system for that exact purpose. So what they do is they set up a sort of a telemedicine arm of their business, and so of the patients that they insure, of the people that they insure who have hypertension, they enroll them into that sort of program. They provided our device and our system, and so they are monitoring and managing those patients' hypertensions proactively on an ongoing basis, because they know that they'll eventually, recoup the benefit of that in terms of cost savings in the future. So there is benefits there, I think, but that is usually driven on the side of the payer side. The payer itself, the insurance company itself, wants to do that kind of program, and then they set it up. We don't sell data to anyone. We are not going to sell someone's data to anyone else. That is not at all in our mission or business to do that.
So tell me, in terms of the product here, hopefully it's going to be in the United States very soon. 18 months in Europe. How's it going? How are things going in Europe right now?
That's going great. So, I mean, it's we have about 30,000 active users, growing at about 3,000 per month, to the point where it's difficult to keep up with the demand in the markets that we're in already. And we've had to ramp that up in anticipation of US market launch as well. So we're seeing incredible traction on the direct to consumer side, or the direct to over the counter, sort of sales. And in terms of the enterprise sales, as I mentioned, the two large insurance companies are already using this on their groups, and we're having significant traction now with healthcare organizations that want to deploy a largely remote hypertension program across large, populations or large groups of their patients. So it's
Great.
going, very well. And the more data and the more we publish on it based on these studies and based on these, trials, it's going to snowball.
And so your device is using an optical sensor, correct?
That's correct.
To the extent that you can talk about this, is it different than, say, an optical sensor inside an Apple Watch or a Garmin or something, or are you taking the same optical data and kind of running it through your algorithm or something?
Correct. The IP is all in the algorithm predominantly. Okay. The sensors here are not anything proprietary or that complicated. It's but high quality, but fairly standard optical chips, optical sensors, and LED light set. That's done on purpose because, in the future, and I can't talk too much of the details about this, but in the future,
probably not, I'm guessing.
we will basically not have to, we will be able to allow our software to run on other third-party wearables. And so converting them into a true medical grade device, which currently really consumer wearables are not, right, because of our software and algorithm. So yeah, and it was purposely done that way. We do not want to make proprietary hardware.
Well, and the thing is then too, is you can hop on to essentially anyone else's hardware and the ability to distribute it across way bigger channels.
It sort of becomes like a distribution channel for us. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exciting. So Chief Medical Officer, what are you doing? What's your day-to-day like when you're working with a startup as a Chief Medical Officer?
It's kind of different every day, which is exciting. But, and one of the great things about being part of a startup is you get to touch so many parts of the business. Versus if I was sort of in a medical role at a large strategic, gigantic multinational corporation, you'd be very much staying in a certain lane. But Chief Medical Officer at Aktiia, I have significant role in the commercial side of the business, talking to prospective customers and explaining the use cases across their particular businesses and the value proposition, product development, sort of routinely in the product meetings and sort of shepherding the product, along the lines of what would be clinically useful and clinically the most sort of best decisions to make or to take with the product. Regulatory quality, handling large parts of the regulatory submissions and crafting the strategy around that, and research and development. Sort of, taking the system into research organizations, working with primary principal investigators, publishing data on our device and our medical grade capabilities, and so all of those things. So it's an incredibly diverse role, and it also includes sort of investor relations. At least helping our CEO and leadership team, go through the processes of fundraising as well. So it really involves a number of different avenues or aspects, and again, for me, has been an incredible education, and I continue to learn every day, and which is great. And so I really enjoyed all of those aspects of it.
So you mentioned fundraising. Fundraising environment has changed dramatically in the last really 24 months or so. How has that impacted your team?
Yeah. Well, it has changed dramatically for all the reasons that generally people who are aware of the private and public markets probably know. But the difference is, so we did a Series A raise a little over 18 months ago that closed. And we're actively in the process of our Series B right now. The difference is not so much that there isn't money. There's actually a tremendous amount of capital that's available for deployment. I think a lot of organizations and investors have tightened up significantly in terms of not so much what they would invest in, but the valuations. So I think probably I think that's going to be the trickier part, is arriving at a valuation now versus 18 months ago would probably be a significant delta there. That's not to say that it's not, it's important, but as long as it allows us to continue to grow the business and gives us fresh capital for further investments, and as long as we stay really disciplined with our approach and stay extremely lean, which is generally our principle, I think we're well positioned to grow the business into the future and certainly after the FDA decision. And that's really where we're positioning ourselves for this fundraise.
Well, I think what's pretty amazing is you can go back and look at the private markets, and the companies that are undergoing significant growth or launching in the wake of some of these financial dislocations end up being absolutely monsters, relative to the companies that were launched when money was free and everybody could do whatever they wanted. I mean, if they're coming up in an environment where they've got to tell a great story, because there's always money out there. I think there's always money. And as you said, there's enormous pools of money out there just waiting to invest. But you're right, valuations are being compressed right now.
Yeah. But I think, like you said, Brent, is that the rigor that you have to stand up to as a company is higher, and that bar is higher. So I think in a way, as we get through it, I think it'll actually make us stronger.
Absolutely.
And make us a better, more well-positioned. And I agree that the other companies that get through, some will fall away because they can't stand up to the scrutiny, and others that do will, I think, are better positioned for their future growth.
Now, you came from an environment with physician leadership. And so Mayo Clinic, to those of you obviously familiar with the name, but there is a physician, each department has a physician head, and then there's also administrative head. So there's a physician leadership throughout the entire organization. Now you're coming to Aktiia here in the startup world. You obviously are a physician in a position of leadership. How about the rest of the company? And give me an idea why you think it's important to have physician leadership in this space.
Yeah. So, I mean, for Aktiia, I'm at this point, the only physician in the company. It's largely built by engineers, software teams, software developers, and now we're getting more sort of management layers on top of that. And so I think I think it's a credit to the leadership and to the board that they went out and recruited a chief medical officer so early in their process. It's very rare to see a chief medical officer in a Series A company. That just generally doesn't happen. In fact, there are many digital health companies that don't even have a chief medical officer at all. And I think that, and even biopharma, and I think that's oftentimes why perhaps sometimes they might struggle, not because I do something dramatically different to the overall, sort of strategy, but you have a different perspective when you have real medical experience sitting in the room, and it really shifts the conversation to where the market truly is, to where the gaps are. What are the real problems that need to be solved? Not some perceived problems, or not some problem that is a very tech-focused solution. So, and I think that's really where Aktiia excels, is that we have this technology, which is proprietary, it is unique, it is one of a kind, it is sort of defining its own category. But that's actually not how we look at it. We don't look at it as a technology. We look at it as a data solution for a disease, for a real underlying, so to really impact the people. And we talk about it all the time internally. Our North Star, our mission is to help 100 million people with hypertension have a better outcome. That's our primary endpoint. It's not to sell devices. It's not to sell software. It's about, in the end of the day, it's about the people. That's why our founders started the company. And that's why there's such a focus on real, solutions in healthcare. So I think that's really why a physician voice is so critical in these types of, entrepreneurial endeavors or startups or initiatives, because it really guides the team in the direction where the problems actually lie, to solve real world solutions. And I think that's such an opportunity for physicians who are looking to do something different and maybe have that spark, or want to try something that's perhaps a little bit more, quite different than clinical practice, is that they need your input. They need our perspective. They're really kind of desperate for it. And there is a sort of a lack of it in the overall environment. And I think that sort of reinforces, how important that physician leadership is, or physician input really is in all these decisions. So I think that's what I've seen over this last year plus.
So in this device we're close to launching here in the United States, what's it going to cost?
So in Europe right now, the retail price over the counter is about $219 US. Yeah. So it's going to be probably roughly the same, in initially, and that's a one-time price. At this point, there's not like a subscription fee. It's a one-time. You get the device, you get the whole system, you get all the hardware that's required, and you get the software and the app. So
what does it cost, whether it's Mayo or any of the big hospitals, to treat somebody with bad chronic hypertension?
So, that's a good question, but I'll tell you that I can't boil it down to an individual hospital basis, but I can tell you what it costs the, healthcare system generally. And it's about, in the US, it's somewhere between 200 to $250 billion cost of untreated hypertension. In the world, it's probably close to 400 billion. And the thing that makes it difficult is that you can count heart attacks, you can count strokes, you can count death, you can count heart failure, but it's difficult to count exactly how much hypertension has had a role in all of those. Right. So there have been many studies that have estimated that hypertension directly causes about 18 million deaths per year. That's by the WHO. And the direct impact to overall healthcare costs in the US, 200 to 250 billion, when the world is close to 400 billion. So that's the general answer that I could probably say.
I think one of the things that's so exciting about where we're going with a lot of this wearable technology is I'm all about individual empowerment, and you're really empowering individuals. They can choose to use the data or not, but you're empowering them to make some decisions about their own life and actually see real time what the outcome of different decisions are. And I do think this is such a cool thing. And to the extent that, one guy who's a dad with 3 or 4 kids running around who says, maybe I should think about this, maybe I shouldn't, and straps this thing on, and then gets enough of a call to action in his own life to make the meaningful changes. I mean, you've saved an entire family with that. And I'm not trying to be, over the top here in terms of the praise for it, but I think it's really real. And I look at this country, and my wife works for Mayo, as you know. Thank God for Mayo Clinic. I'm grateful for them. But I think that medicine throughout the entire West, if I get run down by a truck, I want Western medicine to repair me and fix me up. I also think Western medicine is really good at providing Band-Aids that don't do much about recognizing or solving an underlying problem. And to the extent that people can empower themselves maybe to take a harder look at different aspects of their life, I think is a wonderful thing. So very excited about this product. And I am absolutely I'll be a guinea pig for it when we're launched here in the United States. But Jay, before we wrap it up, and again, I know you're real busy, and I really appreciate the time you've taken and the candidness with your answers in this conversation. Any final closing thoughts in terms of anything you'd like to add to our discussion? How can people find you, find Aktiia, find the product, buy the product? What would you like to share with anybody?
I would just like to, tag on to your last comment that you're 100% right, is that modern quote unquote medicine is exceedingly designed to be reactive. It's designed to react to some problem that has occurred today. It is really not designed in any way to prevent that problem 20 years before or 10 years before. And I think that's really where we are starting to see something shift in the culture of healthcare overall to kind of push people to really look at that preventive side. But I do think you're 100% right in that the individual person has to be, I think, the driver of that. Mm-hmm. And that's really, as you said, that's really what we try to do, is empower those individuals, empower each other, empower ourselves. We're all going to be patients one day, and empower ourselves to really make those actionable changes and using the data that we get. I think if anyone wants to learn more about Aktiia, just go to our website. It's the easiest place to go, aktiia.com, aktiia.com. We have a place you can sign up for updates as we get closer to US market launch, and that'll get you on our mailing list, and you can see all the updates as well as all our publications and how the device and system work. It's all right there. Awesome.
And if anyone wants to reach you personally?
Yeah, if you want to reach me personally, you can go there. Same thing on the website. There's a way to ask to kind of contact us if there's any inquiries about on the medical side or healthcare providers or any sort of partnership or our opportunities. There's a contact us form, and that'll come straight to us, and it'll get to the right person in the team.
Excellent. Jay, again, thank you so much, and this is a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Brent. Really appreciate your time.
Jay, I just want to echo what Brent said. I am so excited. I mean, I didn't know what this conversation was going to be, and my wife has struggled with high blood pressure, and so she's fairly healthy. As long as your little device tells her she can still cook homemade tortillas, we're fine, because that's her only vice is the homemade tortillas. But I mean, this is something that, as a husband, I've been worried about. Right, I want her to sit down, relax for a little bit. She's always busy, and so hopefully this will give her an insight. So I'm looking forward to the launch. I'll be one of the first in line. Sounds like I'll be right behind Brent. So I'm excited. Thank you so much for this, Brent. Thank you for bringing on another amazing guest for not only myself, of course, but for the listening audience. You're amazing. If people want to reach out to you and maybe they can get some advice from you to lower their blood pressure, just we're getting their finances in order. How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, our number here at the office is 602-255-0555. And your Kayla can easily set up an appointment for us to, let me start over on that again, Ed team. Yeah, absolutely. Number here is 602-255-0555. Would love to speak with anybody about anything we talked about today or anything else that's on your mind. And also very active on LinkedIn, so you can just search me on LinkedIn, and we post a lot of content up there. And our website is smartmoneysimplified.com or mpadvisorsaz.com, and a lot of info about our group there as well.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much. And of course, our last thank you goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with Brent Mekosh. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Brent comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. We humbly ask you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this actually helps others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at MP Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day, and we'll see you next time.